r/AskReddit. Former undercover cops of Reddit. What is the craziest thing you had to do to not blow your cover? I must have been 15 when one day the doorbell rang and I opened the door to two guys looking very much like real tough street guys. They showed me their badges and asked for my mum or dad. Turned out that they wanted to stake out a public playground behind our garden that was used by some drug dealers for their mules. People drinking large amounts of water and puking up little packages with some substance in it. There was a multi-story bank near the playground, but the bank didn't want anything to do with it. So they asked my parents whether they could set up a surveillance team on our terrace for a couple of days. My parents allowed it, and my mum prepared food for the guys all week long. Your mom is a legend. My dad did undercover for several years and talked about a meth head that he hung out with all the time and even babysat her kids when she went out to get high. This went on for several months while they were figuring out who the big dealer was and acquiring warrants. He grew a beard, had a fake kid, drove an old shitty car. Eventually they got warrants to bust a bunch of people in the drug ring, and he actually was part of the SWAT team at the time and was part of the group that smashed in doors and arrested her and a bunch of others in the area. He had to wear a balaclava to protect his identity when with the SWAT team. He said it was actually really difficult because he had become an important part of those kids' lives and was kind of attached to them, and now they had no mother and had to be taken to Child Protective Services. I never got to ask him more questions about this before he passed, but I have no idea how he balanced this crazy second life and then came home and acted like a normal husband and father in our family. Plot twist. That kid was you. I know a guy who often went undercover as a junkie. He was committed. He'd stop showering for a while before a gig and piss on his tracksuit before going into work. He was so good that he managed to get the same dealer convicted twice in the space of a year and they never suspected he was the rat. He had multiple police records under different names too. City cop here. We don't do too much long-term undercover, but our general orders have a policy covering use of drugs on duty in certain circumstances. While it doesn't specify that we can do drugs, it states that if we consume them we have to immediately respond to our department's health clinic for documentation and treatment. Fine, I'll hit the doobie bruh. I need immediate medical attention. I once was the gardener for a cop who worked undercover in the sex trade to identify pimps, traffickers and extract underage kids. She retired early due to mental health issues likely stemming from drug use during her time undercover. To keep cover she would do the drugs that were being offered used. Of course things spiraled out of control for her and suddenly she's on permanent paid leave and she stays in the house most days hiding from the world. So for her, what she did to keep cover is offer up her sanity in exchange for some successful arrests. Not a cop but a guy my mom dated for a long time was. Older guy, in his 70s now. He was fresh out of the academy and at the Asbury Park riots. Sad scary shit. And then was an undercover narcotics cop for 14 years during the 70s and 80s with the NJSP. He was Puerto Rican and spoke Spanish, was an ex-Marine, and became a state trooper. They utilized his ability to blend in with organized crime and the Latin community. He had to do coke in front of a bunch of dudes during a buy one night, and basically stuck his knife in and blew a mound up his nose. Then he started having a minor paranoia panic attack that they were going to find out he was a cop. Thanks to the gram of blow he just took to the dome, he was breathing heavy and went out for air. His heart was pounding out of his chest. Panicking over how to get out of it, one of the gangsters came outside to talk to him. He's ready to run or fight. Guy goes, man, I've never seen someone snort that much at once, man. You okay? He sighs a huge sigh of relief and was like, yeah, I never did that much. I'm having trouble breathing. Her. The guy was really nice. Brings him a drink and they smoked a cig. Everyone is joking that he has the heart of a lion to take that much. He actually felt bad about locking that one guy up when it all went down. Think he said he tried to help him or get a reduced sentence or something. There are other stories. You know what that means. This is the Spider-Man meme but in real life. My cousin was an undercover ATF agent. Anyway, they were trying to bust some guys for illegal alcohol distribution and were building a rapport by going undercover. My cousin doesn't take his ATF badge with him when he's undercover because if anyone ever saw it, he could get shot. Anyway, some hot-headed black and white cops came over and started harassing them. My cousin couldn't blow his cover, but pretty soon the police started getting physical and they beat crap out of my cousin and the guys he is trying to get evidence from. They take them all into the police station only to find out that my cousin is ATF. My cousin was pissed because cops aren't supposed to beat people up. He is currently filing a lawsuit against that police department. Good on your cousin for filing a lawsuit and actually trying to get some justice on those cops. And he deserves a promotion for managing to keep his cover through all that. He's like a secret shopper but for cops. A secret copper? I have gone undercover online to infiltrate child pornography rings. Nothing too intense. But I had to interact with suspects online over phone who were ducking sick in the head and act like it was not the most vile shit in the world. I've heard about undercover cops in these situations having to actually possess child porn as well. Wasn't sure how true that was. If it is true, I can't imagine ever putting myself in this situation. Not very exciting, but a guy that worked with me was going to this biker bar frequently to get in with a gang. Drug related. He didn't want to get hammered and do something stupid, so he would take his beers into the bathroom with him, dump out half and fill it with water. Drinking watered down beer is the real crime. That shit sounds gross. It's worked for the big American breweries for the last century. As a former correctional officer, we had a situation where a major police department planted a cop in the prison to get information on a guy they believed was orchestrating hits from inside the prison. The warden knew and I knew, by accident, but not a single other CO knew, nor did any of the staff, including medical, and that's the way they wanted it. He went through receiving. He was categorized and placed. It was wild. He was there for a week. Got the info they needed and got him out. It didn't become public knowledge that he was undercover until after I had left, and it was a long while after as they were making a case. That was a surreal moment. Can you imagine if they forgot about him or lost the paperwork? I don't know how it's run, but I'm sure he has another way out. I can't imagine it'd be too easy to let him fall through the cracks. Now I watched The Departed, so I know they could just throw away the UC guy's file and he'd just be a criminal in the eyes of the law. My friend used to be a state trooper. She told me about how she used to have to go undercover as a hooker to try to catch Johns. She didn't do so well, though. She was far too polite, so they all knew something was up. Sir, I am soliciting a sex act on you. Would you like to proceed? I imagine good Janet's trying to pretend she's bad Janet. Come over here, you dum-dum. OMG. I'm so sorry. It was more like her trying to talk to men that walked by like, excuse me, sir, and they would just keep walking. Bing. Janet is me. Bing. Informal law enforcement. I did a few deployments in a surveillance capacity to sit near targets in restaurants and bars to overhear conversations. Sorry to disappoint, but I didn't do anything particularly crazy. Criminals just tend to talk about the same shit that everyone else talks about. Women and sports. Publicly they tend not to talk too much about their criminal activities, but you can still glean information from places they say they went to and people they say they know. You mean to tell me that what's shown on television doesn't reflect reality? Law enforcement is so risk averse now it makes things very dull. With police access to your phone calls, phone records, internet, bank records, etc., the resources and risk required to put an undercover into a criminal group is just not justified. It still goes on, but most big criminal investigations happen in an intercept suite, listening to phone calls waiting for the bad guys to duck up. Read Good Cop, Bad War if you want some gnarly undercover stories. Not a former undercover cop, but I have a second-hand story about an undercover cop. So, this guy appears out of nowhere and befriends a relative of mine who was involved in illegal stuff. Dude was very friendly and just down to party. Had money. Paid for. Product. Everything. Would drop in on parties and even allegedly hooked up with hoes. Then he placed an order much larger than before. Few weeks later, relative of mine is arrested and is currently in prison. Craziest thing an undercover cop had to do to keep their cover? Buy drugs and duck beaches. My friend who was an undercover cop said that multiple times he had to let himself be arrested to not blow his cover. Like when a sting was going down or whatever, instead of being like, hey, I'm a cop, he would get arrested along with everyone else. Former jailer for a large metro department here. We'd be notified that somebody was UC coming in from a raid, but other than that they were treated just the same as any other arrest. We'd keep an eye on them in camera to ensure safety. We were usually told ahead of time so nobody went, "Hey Smith, how'd you get arrested, man? Shit, your SGT is gonna be pissed. etc. Edit. By ensuring safety I mean watching for potential fights. We do the same for any number of scenarios and people. Our goal was to spot and stop fights before they became physical. Edit 2. We were a temporary detention facility. Most would be in custody for 24-48 hours to see a judge in the morning or get moved to county, so most only maybe a day. One time a Homeland Security officer came up to my house undercover, flashed his badge and asked if he could come in. Once he was in, he pulled out a piece of paper with my neighbor's face on it. He asked if I had seen him around lately. When I asked what he did, and let him know I haven't seen him around, he told me what he was wanted for: rape, child abuse, drugs, the whole lot. Turns out he raped his stepdaughter, and once he found out he was wanted he went back to El Salvador. I thought they only flashed their badges in the movies, but turns out the shit's real. My neighbor was pretty heavily into heroin, and once when my friend and I were the sycamore tree in our front yard, we saw two guys dressed in suits walk up the street towards his house. One bent down to pet our cat, and we saw the pistol on his hip. He looked up at us and motioned us to be quiet. The first one went to the front door, and the other went around the back. Another time the whole SWAT team went through our backyard to get into their place. Eventually the guy overdosed, and that was the end of that. Even while on duty, pet cat. I worked as a transcriptionist for a while, and I transcribed some tape taken off of body mics of undercover officers working a very notorious domestic terrorism case. It was crazy. They would sound like an absolute backwoods hill people lunatic while talking to their marks. Then later when talking to the other police officers, would sound all business and like a very professional person. As someone who is literally on Reddit avoiding my transcription duties, this sounds a lot more interesting than what I'm currently writing up. I'm just curious, but how does one become a transcriptionist? I have a relative that was undercover narcotics. Before he started we had a family meeting explaining that if we saw him out and about we were not to approach him and not to say anything to him and a few other dos and don'ts. He will come to you if he's not undercover at the moment. Former government employees. What is the craziest classified document you've ever seen? Turns out JFK wasn't assassinated at all. His head just kinda did that. Not a cop, but in college I took a few criminal justice classes. Our professor, who I will call Bob, was a cop for 15 or so years and had gone undercover in the 80s for a very long time. Bob was biker as a hobby and he was sent undercover to break up a meth ring in the biker community. Bob arranged to buy some meth from some guy, and shortly after the buy the dealer was arrested. The dealer's sister started telling everyone she thought Bob was a cop, and some of the other bikers started asking him questions. So day or so after the sister started accusing Bob of being a narc, the entire group was at a bar. Bob told a few of the guys to meet him outside in a few minutes, and Bob told the sister he had some meth for her and to come outside. When they finally got out there, Bob told her, "Where I'm from, friends don't call friends narcs." He then beat the shit out of her in front of the entire group. He kicked her as hard as he could between her legs, which, while not as painful if you're a woman, still hurts. Then he said he punched her 4 or 5 times in the face. Hard. He said he didn't wanna do it, but after he did that no one ever accused him of being a cop again. So much for the secret. Not exactly what I was expecting, but interesting nonetheless, lol. Well, since no one is saying anything, I'll just throw out a slightly on-topic conversation change. There's a show on Netflix called Deep Undercover. They are all 25-30 minute episodes about a real life undercover operation. There's like 50 episodes and some of them are completely insane. I think the craziest one was about the New Orleans Police Department. I highly recommend it. Edit. Since so many people are wanting to watch this show, don't get your hopes up for binge watching purposes. They all have the same format, so after 7-8 episodes it starts to get really repetitive. I usually watch a couple before I get bored, but the first night I watched a shit ton. So I don't want you all going in with really high expectations and being disappointed, lol. I'll have to check this out. This is the first I've heard of it. My cousin worked undercover in the biker community. He was really into working out and bodybuilding, so he managed to convince everybody that he treated his body like a temple and didn't drink, do drugs, or eat like shit. That wasn't very far from the truth, so it wasn't hard for him to play that part. He is also a former Marine sharpshooter, so he is tough as nails and pretty heavily tattooed, so he definitely gave off a don't duck with me vibe. I know a guy, retired police officer, who works as an investigator of crooked doctors. He dresses up in disguises and is given a fake name to use. He goes into doctors' offices and tries to find out if a doctor who is suspected of overprescribing narcotics is legit or not. He told me a story about a time he went in to see a dentist about a minor toothache and walked out of there with a prescription for Percocet and Dilaudid. He says there are plenty of legit doctors out there, but there are also a lot of careless ones who give in to their drug-seeking patients. It wasn't me, but my grandfather. Guy worked narcotics. Had to get in with some guys who dealt meth and was pretending to be a user himself. I believe he actually had to shoot up once or twice. One day one of the higher ups was starting to get suspicious. Didn't believe my grandpa was actually a user or anything because he didn't have any marks on his arm, where they normally do. And my grandpa told them that he doesn't shot there, but near his pelvis. Said he was more than happy to pull down his pants and undies to show him. Dude didn't want to see any dong and my grandpa got away with it. He lives in a whole ass other state now for safety reasons because a lot of the guys he put away years ago are now getting out. Nice try, drug lord. I imagine there are numerous drug lords and cartel leaders anxiously waiting for responses to this question. Just waiting.